Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the next in the series of the DeepCrawl webinars. This one today is obviously the new era, the Google mobile first universe. And obviously, we've been talking about this for an incredible amount of time now, for the last year or so in some respects. And when you think back, Google first announced this 18 months ago. I think we've got a great panelist today. As always, my name is John Wise. I'm the Chief Growth Officer of DeepCrawl, and I'm joined today by Mr. Bastian Grimm, who is the CEO of PCase, who, like me, has been all over the world talking about this subject. So, I mean, Bastian, first of all, thank you for taking the time to join us today on the DeepCrawl webinar.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
No problem at all. And I think we have moved on in some respects, and we're looking to look at a bit of an update today in some respects. I mean, I certainly did a session on one of these previous series of our webinars with a latest release where we talked about this last year, and we started to predict the shift and think about it. And both me and Aleda kind of thought about it in the sense of Q2 this year. So I'm very, very keen to get your thoughts on where we are and what's going on. But when you start to think about the numbers in some respects, I mean, 60% of all of Google's searches now are occurring via mobile devices, and that's in the context of 2 trillion searches a year. So it's an incredible amount of searches. And this isn't something new. I mean, I'm sure there's people on this webinar today, and it's great to see people still joining the webinar now. We've had a fantastic response for the amount of registrations for this one, probably our biggest ever in some respects. And it's not new, because Google has been talking about this for around about 18 months now. So what I'm really keen to get from you today is, what's happening, what's the current position, what do people need to think about, what do they need to do, is it too late in some respects? We're going to take questions as well. So obviously it's the usual format for any attendees that have been with us on the DeepCrawl webinars. Bastian's going to present for around about half an hour, and then we're going to absolutely delve into Q&A. So we really, really do welcome your questions. So for you guys that are online at the moment, we will be taking questions via the chat box and question box within the webinar panel. So please start to think about questions, and as as Bastian goes through the presentation, if you want to shout a question towards us, please do. We will then pull them all together, and I can start the Q&A process once Bastian's finished his talk. So I think it's fair to say there's a load of questions needing answering here, and I'm hoping we've got the answers for you today. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Bastian in a moment to start the presentation. And I just would actually like to shout out as well, as part of the pack that you have with this webinar for attending today, we've pushed our mobile first white paper to you as well. So you're able to download that now as the webinar's going on and digest a pretty in-depth view of the what's happening in the world of mobile first index. But I want to hand over to Bastian today and give you the stage, sir, to talk us through where we are and what we need to think about as we move into, certainly for me, an absolute new reality. Over to you, Bastian, and thank you.
Excellent, John. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I think it's a good wrap up already on a couple of things that I will kind of hopefully touching on in the next 30 or so minutes. Yeah, I thought we kind of start with a bit of a status quo really, and try to figure out what's going on, and then kind of also I thought it would be good to just give you a couple of just hints and ideas on things that we are currently doing, if we're working with clients or if we work on our own sites, to just kind of make sure that whenever kind of a site is really kind of switched over to this new reality, if you so will, that it doesn't lose out really. So I think I kind of just walk you through a bit of a process, a bit of thoughts and ideas kind of I have around the topic, or I had around the topic, and a couple of discussions that I picked up left and right. And I'd like to kind of kick off with the question, why all the fuss? What's all the discussion about that, and why essentially is this whole mobile first thing that important? And I think there's two nice quotes that I picked up last year at SMX Advanced, where Gary essentially said that Google never had to swap over an entire index to something new, and this is really new for them, and doing that without testing and without experimentation didn't seem possible at the time. And I think that kind of ties into what you said, John, at the very beginning. This discussion is there like really for quite a while. I'd even say it's probably even 2 years and a bit older. So Google really decided that they needed to test certain things and figure out, if things are working the way it's supposed to work. Otherwise, obviously, they kind of suffer massively in terms of quality, and that obviously is something they can't really have. And then also the second big thing, and I think that's also quite interesting if you think about it a bit. I mean, the desktop index is really quite old, and especially the link graph or all the linking signals is quite a challenge to get right. I mean, we're going to be talking about the different site setups later on, the m dot subdomain versus the dot and all. But if you think about it for a second, I mean, like all the m dot subdomains literally don't have any kind of external inbound link equity. Or all the discussion about the relations with, rel canonical and rel alternate. So all of that they have to get right. So obviously this is also like a huge challenge for them. And I think that's also part of the, why did it actually take so long? As we will be seeing later, I will be sharing some examples of stuff that I picked up along the last, half year or so. Some things are really just still not working well. And that's also a bit scary, considering how long they've been playing with that. So, let's go one step back and figure out what this mobile first indexing essentially means. And I guess why, Google, or what Google is actually going to do and why they're doing it. So essentially, if you think about it, so this mobile first indexing process really is about them preferring and organizing cross-device content in a way that it can easily be queried and then displayed on different devices. And if you think about it, that totally makes sense if you look at the recent numbers. And John, you touched on some of those. And this is actually data from mid of 2016, so it's probably even outdated kind of again. So the mobile search percentage is massive. And then if you think about the experience that someone has starting on a mobile device, or at least a device that's not coming along with the resolution of a desktop device, and then you search on Google or any search engine for that matter, but you search on Google and you end up on a site that doesn't really work on mobile, or even worse, has been scored and ranked based on desktop factors, and now is appearing in mobile results, but probably doesn't even deliver what you're expecting, then that's obviously not a great user experience. And they've been playing with that quite a bit in the past, and we already have loads of those different things popping up in the mobile SERPs depending on the searcher's intent, right? So I mean, what has been around forever is obviously all the local listings. We have loads and loads and loads of different one boxes, knowledge graph boxes, all of that stuff. We have app packs popping in, and then we also have those new or semi-new video ads, not video ads, video integrations, where they even start playing those clips kind of automatically, which is I think super annoying. But anyways, so loads of different things depending on what kind of queries you're doing. And I think the signs have been there for quite a while. So when Game of Thrones was the latest season was aired in the States, if you looked at the search results at the time on any mobile device, then essentially there were no real organic results. So this is the first 50% of the screen, and then going to the next, you would have to scroll down like 75% almost to even see any on any mobile SERP, which is really kind of a strong sign, I guess, that they're trying to figure out, what's the query, what's the intent, and then deliver anything that fits, not necessarily organic results anymore. And they even kind of answering questions, which is I think quite interesting, directly in mobile Chrome. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we will interact with a SERP, with the search results at all. But anyways, I think what's quite clear with that is that rankings will in the future, or for some sites already now, be based on the mobile side and not on the desktop side. So what happened in the past was that essentially Google took the desktop markup on the desktop side, if you so will, did all the rankings and calculations and anything on those desktop parameters, and then essentially just did slight differences for mobile. So I think not really a big surprise when they announced this entire shift back in end of 2016, but it felt at the time that even Google didn't really know on how they're going to do some of the things, and there was like loads of speculation. And I recall having seen various postings, different statements, and all of that, where one person of Google said something and the other one said something entirely different. So I think it just really reflects on this road that they've been taking in the last almost 24 months to get things sorted. So to kind of sum up what we currently do know, and I think what has been now kind of common knowledge is and then there was a huge discussion around that, I guess. Will they have a separate mobile index, or is it going to be all the same, or how is it going to play out? And I think there were various tweets and lots of people involved. And I think one of the people who should know is Paul Haar, who's one of the engineers at Google and there forever, literally. And I think what came out here was that Paul kind of once and for all confirmed, and then luckily that message stuck. There is just this one single index, and there will only be that one single index. So it doesn't really make sense, also if you think about it conceptually, that you have different indices for desktop versus mobile. So keep in mind that this is still that one single index. The only difference that's happening now, obviously, is that they take different information and then obviously store that during the process and then rank you on different information. But essentially, that's still all in the same index. And then obviously that kind of raises different questions, especially, and there still are, which is I think quite surprising, but there still are, obviously, especially in B2B and then kind of the more classic, I wouldn't say old-fashioned, but yeah, more traditional industries probably is the right word. There are loads of sites that still really only work on desktop. And if we kind of take out this entire discussion about is that a good user experience or is it not, then obviously still Google can't really have those sites dropping out, right? So for desktop-only sites, essentially it all stays the same. The only difference that is going to happen is if you look at your log files, what you would see at some point is that obviously the crawling volume coming from mobile user agents should spike up, and then the volume coming from the classic desktop Googlebot is going to decrease. But essentially, since the site is still the same, the mobile crawler gets the same data. So essentially, the rankings will also be the same. So from desktop-only sites, you don't really have to worry, just from a Google perspective. However, though, I think that should absolutely not be an excuse to have not a proper mobile user experience, I think, because from a user perspective, that's probably as bad as it can be. And then the other big discussion, and I just use the accordion or the hidden tab example, but there's obviously multiple different kind of elements on mobile sites purely due to the fact that obviously we have way less screen real estate. So on mobile, what happens obviously is that you oftentimes into the situation where you have to fold things together, or where you can't show all the content at once, and then some type of interaction is happening. You press a read more, or you're swiping, or whatever the interaction is. But essentially, those are very common mobile user elements, right? And then on desktop, we knew back in the day, and there was different statements, but some Googlers said, well, content that's hidden might be valued less. Some testing showed that even kind of hidden content, even if it was in the markup, didn't rank at all. So essentially, I think the takeaway was, if you want to make sure that something really ranked, then you had it displayed entirely on the site without any interaction. For mobile, though, it seems that as long as you can ensure that the content is present in the markup, that this is okay. So you don't have to change all the mobile sites now to just show all the content, which is absolutely not doable anyways. But yeah, so stick with that. That should be all right. And then another big thing and another big discussion, I think that's a really important one, is what's going to happen if my mobile site or my mobile experience is compared to desktop serving less content. And then if you think about it, obviously, if Google is now taking the, in a sense, shorter site with less content and is going to rank you based on that, then, well, the only answer can be that if there's anything important missing on the desktop compared to, on the mobile compared to the desktop, sorry, then obviously you're in danger of losing that ranking for, say, that's a specific phrase or a keyword that is only present on the desktop content. That's a problem. So parity is a big thing, and parity is not only crucial in the sense of serving content. It's also tag parity, and we're going to talk about that later on a bit. But so if you think about this classic m dot versus setup, then oftentimes, say, schema markup, for example, is only implemented on the desktop version, but it's not implemented on the mobile side. So if you're not on a responsive side, and we're going to be touching on different types of delivery also in a second. So if you're on an m dot side and your site has not the same content or the same markup, then that's obviously not a good idea. So essentially, that's partially one of the things that you really want to take care of to get this parity in order. And then, there has been this massive discussion about ranking factors and if there's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't want to take any sides here. I think it's always kind of good to understand what things might make a difference in search rankings. But anyways, I think, and that's the only kind of check mark, that's why I have it in here, is that essentially the ranking factors per se, kind of the known things that we do know, they stay the same. So let's just leave it with that. But we really early on saw some very strange things going on, to be honest. So this is, for example, from a client side, where the mobile subdomain started to rank for desktop queries, and that time frame, if you look on the axis down, then you'd see that started in end of 2016, which was essentially at the same time where they kind of announced this rollout. So it was really funny, and we didn't change anything. It was a bulletproof setup. It was going on for 3 years. We rechecked everything when it happened, so there was nothing there. And then at some point it dropped back. So Google was really, or is still really, testing things out there, which was quite interesting. And some stuff they're doing seems to me like really entirely useless. So for example, in this case, it's a desktop site with site links pointing to mobile, and that only changed after the mobile first indexing kind of discussion. So I'm not entirely sure, and I do understand that obviously it's based on traffic patterns and all, but I'm not entirely sure they got all the things really sorted out to perfection. Another thing that's good and bad, I think. So end of 2017, I chaired a panel with Gary in Barcelona, and I was asking him about the fact that, because they were like straight before, I think John Mueller said something like, I don't believe we'll be giving you any type of notification, right? So I was like, but if you switch it over, just one side after the other, and from an SEO perspective, how are we going to understand if was just something broken, or if that site has been switched over to mobile first and then something broke afterwards? So, but finally, I think someone apparently kind of listened in. So the really good thing is now they are going to tell you, and then the first batch of those went out just a couple of days ago. They kind of going to tell you if your site has been switched over to mobile first indexing using Google Search Console. So I think that's a really good thing, which makes it, especially from an SEO perspective, way easier to understand, if something else went wrong, or if there's just really something entirely broken. So I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So probably one of the things that you should watch out for. Another thing I wanted to touch on, and let's just give a bit of background on this, context of mobile, because I feel like whenever I go into discussion with clients and people around this topic, that oftentimes there's loads of confusions about, is mobile defined by resolution, or is it defined by device, and what's one, what's the other, right? Couple of considerations before we really start with that. So for Google, and when they're now doing the rendering of a site, and that's obviously what you can see also in Google Search Console. What they do have to do, obviously, to understand how a site is built and then how a site is supposed to be displayed, is that they also need all your JavaScript and all your CSS files, and obviously also all the images. So first thing and first consideration, make sure that this is not blocked, so that they can actually access that, which they will. And an interesting point to that is I mentioned that they will need to understand your JavaScript. Roughly 94–95% of all sites nowadays are using any kind of JavaScript. And JavaScript being a front-end language, effectively the kind of the old crawler, if you so will, or the old crawlers that Google has, they were not able to process the JavaScript because essentially they were just not executing it. Thus, what happened for them was that they would miss parts of the things that would be happening kind of on the front end side of a website. And then with 90+%, that's loads of them. If any of those would use any JavaScript on the front end and would do any modifications to the output, or in the sense of how the site is actually built, then the old crawler would kind of miss that. So I think that's also one of the big reasons why why they actually really were keen to get the JavaScript rendering figured out. And I think one of the side notes, and this is really interesting and really important if you do any type of kind of SEO audit nowadays. And if you have JavaScript heavy or front end heavy sites that use any kind of JavaScript framework, so this is taken from Angular, but it could also be React or any of the other ones, then if you just look at the source code as you would do 2 or 3 years ago when you kind of perform your SEO audit, and next to all the crawling data that you collect, you look into the markup, then what you would be seeing is something like this, right? So this is essentially it says link rel canonical, but the href, so the location, is essentially not specified. It's just a variable, and that's essentially a JavaScript variable that Angular would fill during runtime. So the old-fashioned kind of crawler would miss that. Only if you want to try that in the browser, what you would do is you would use your Chrome, and then you would just right-click and say inspect element. Then you would get the rendered output. Only at that stage, so with the rendering, the new kind of crawlers are able to pick that up. So that's really important. Don't run into this, I just looked at the markup and it looked weird. So it's not essentially broken. The domain is actually in the, it's just a test domain that I set up like a while ago. So if you just want to, try to reproduce what I did, that should be publicly available. And then there is, and unfortunately I can't, but I know that that Bartosz is going to do a webinar in a couple of weeks, and I'm sure John can share the date later on. Anything and everything about frameworks and JavaScript and the compatibility and what Google makes out of it, really important. So that's probably something that especially the techie guys should be following very closely. But coming back to the rendering side, and that's why I actually brought it up. What is, if you build a site, and then especially if you build responsive sites, the discussion about rendering and breakpoints and when is the site changing and how is it changing is really important. One of the things that I found really interesting is that Google still only is using a 124/7068 resolution, and that's, if you look at any half modern laptop these days, you're probably at 1600 or even bigger. So the resolution that the rendering kind of crawler, rendering bot, whatever you will call it, is using is really not sophisticated right now. So, and the reason why I'm mentioning that is when we're heavily working with responsive sites nowadays, especially in this the mobile first area, because it just makes loads of things easier. You do not have 2 different code bases and all of that. But the thing is, what you need to kind of sort out is your breakpoints. When is the burger menu replacing kind of the classic desktop navigation, right? So, but what would happen is if you would treat the 124, which is, I'd say, kind of a pad resolution, then if you would show the burger menu there for Google, even on desktop, that would be an issue because they're getting the mobile navigation. So that's really interesting. And then really make sure that you watch the breakpoints that you're using on responsive sites, considering that they're still kind of rendering with a pretty old-fashioned resolution, so to say. And the other thing, which is also quite interesting, is that the fetch and render. So if you have very long sites, loads of content on there, the fetch and render is limited to 10,000 pixels in height. And that's also important if you're testing sites, testing responsive sites, and if everything is actually on the site and it's in there, don't be surprised if they cut it off. That happens kind of automatically. And rendering actually seems to be, and that's just a screenshot I just put in very last short notice, but rendering seems to be pretty important, especially in this mobile first context. So we had a client where they were ranking okay-ish for a keyword where we just started working on in France actually. And what happened is, so the site worked well and the content was there, and then the client did a content update and they added more content to the page. And the rendering was destroyed for whatever reason we couldn't figure out, but it was the site was cut off and the rendering output in the Search Console was broken. And what you can see in the rank tracker here is that essentially the rankings entirely dropped. They were just gone. And then when we kind of made sure that the rendering worked again, rankings came back quite quickly. So really interesting. So one of the things that I would definitely do when you check your sites on being ready is just make sure that the rendering, especially on mobile, really works, so you can do both in Search Console. And another remark on that is that the Chrome version that Google's actually using is really old. It's a 41 that's really 3 years or even more than 3 years old nowadays. So that means that what you kind of see in your Chrome on the desktop is obviously entirely different from what Google is, or Googlebot in that case, is seeing. Just because of the different versions. So that's also something to keep in mind. You can, and the link is in the deck, and we will be sharing the presentation afterwards. But what you should and could do is probably just to run a Chrome 41 on one of your machines, and then use the dev console or the console there to see if there's any errors that the new Chrome would not be throwing. And this is also interesting. I hope you're all familiar with that, but just as a side note, what you can do is you can literally render any given site in Search Console if you just use 100% iframe. So that's my domain. That's my domain requesting our agency site, even though I'm not owner of that domain in this account. The only way to prevent that is if the site that I want to iframe is actually using a header to block that. But most of the sites, unfortunately, still don't. So good for us, and bad maybe for your competitors if you want to figure out if they're rendering properly. But coming back to resolution, maybe that is all not that important, because if you look at the latest numbers, and that's I think it makes sense if you think about it. But what they say is that 90% of all users actually start a task on one and then finish on another, and I think that makes sense, right? You're on the couch in the evening, you start some research, and then you finish the purchase, I don't know, on the desktop the day later. And then even though that's a simple one, I think what I found interesting is that they were saying that actually the average one is using 5 kind of connected devices, which is a lot. And if you think about that, then this whole like I do a desktop versus a mobile site can't really work at all, because obviously there's also something in between. What do you do with the pad? You know, my Google Pixel has a different resolution than the iPhone. All of that. So responsive is actually the only real way to probably do that. Also from an SEO perspective, because first and foremost, obviously, you can do the content based on different resolutions. So you design with the smallest viewport that you care about in mind. So probably you go to your analytics, find out what the most common resolutions are, and then have a look at what the smallest ones are that you want to be serving properly, and then you build up. Not in what we did in the past, saying like, well, we have this great, amazing desktop site. Oh yeah, we need a mobile site now as well, and then the experience is really crap. It should be the other way around. So you build with the smallest resolution in mind, and then build it up. And then you can do loads of amazing things with proper responsive sites. Actually, you can have, and that's also great. I want on the desktop, I want those really high-res, amazing pictures, but on the mobile phone, I don't care, right? I just want it to be very fast. So obviously, resolution and formats with the new picture element could be something that you could have a look at. Also, performance is a big thing, especially on responsive sites. Again, in that case, probably would be even easier if you have the M-dot site, which again, I'm not recommending, but the M-dot site obviously has this stripped down CSS, it has less images, etc. Versus on responsive, you need to be really, really accurate on what are you loading when, and how are you doing that. But if you get it right, the results are amazing, and especially you just have this one code base to maintain. And there's lots of other things like paint and repaint that you can optimize for. It's just the different things on responsive that really matter. I'm probably just gonna flip through those, and you can follow up on that later. But performance, just to stick with that very quickly, is really user experience. So it makes a lot of sense to really care about, if you go responsive, to do it right and care about speed, because that, to no surprise, is also now kind of a mobile factor. Again, and in the past, what they were doing is they were competing the page speed scores against the desktop sites. Obviously now, using mobile sites as a foundation, they also need to do the performance scoring, and they are now, or they will be now, sorry, on doing that on the mobile sites. And they're really pushing for that, right? So really, Google is really keen to get fast sites, and they're testing with loads of different things over and over again. So slow to load icons, or just red warning things. And obviously that's a CTR killer, right? So you don't want to be the person, and I don't want to be either, that has that assigned to a snippet, because obviously that's probably killing a click-through rate. So one thing though is that please don't forget desktop now. I mean, as SEOs, we oftentimes have the tendency to go really crazy on one thing that works. So essentially, now please don't forget your desktop, right? Because obviously, Google really still needs both to serve. I have a checklist on SlideShare that's just in here for later and for your reference. If performance is one of the things that you want to follow up on, there's lots of different things, lots of basics, lots of cool stuff. I just leave that here because that's probably killing our timing. I have 10, and that's very quick tips to finish up with on how to prepare if you not have yet gotten the message in Search Console that you have been one of the very few that has been switched over, or if you have been, then essentially you might want to double check if you got all that sorted out. So I think one of the first and foremost things is that you should understand the pros and cons of the different setups that are out there, right? So we do have three. We have the responsive web design, where we just talked about, or that I mentioned quite a bit, with all the pros and cons. We have dynamic serving, which is the hardest thing to get right in my mind, because it's still one URL, but it does different things based on the device that is accessing it. So you would need to have a pretty solid database on user agents and the resolutions and capabilities. Oftentimes that goes wrong. So I think it's the hardest thing to get right. And then there's obviously the m dot versus the dub with an independent mobile site. From a ranking perspective, that should all work. It's all the same. But essentially, for that scenario, for the last scenario, as I mentioned earlier, parity is really crucial. So if you're on that setup, make sure that you synchronize markup, text, content, everything needs to be on the m dot as well. Which versus on the responsive side, it's all there anyways. So it's definitely the easier way to do it. A slight hint on keyword targeting and the keywords that you're using. So really figure out if the keywords that you're targeting on desktop are still the same and have the same intent if that's being used on a mobile device. That's not necessarily the case. So find the tool of your choice and really understand if the split is the same, if the intent is the same, if the volumes are the same, or if you would essentially have to change keyword targeting. Quick and easy testing, and I really like that, is Chrome DevTools on Windows, and sorry for the Mac guys, but on Windows it's Control-Shift and the I, and then you have this the mobile the view, and you can just switch to responsive, reload the site, and that's a very easy, simple testing. If that works, I'd say you're pretty much at least generally okay. If you want to scale that, technicalseo.com, they have a fantastic tool that is using actually Google's API. You can plug in loads of URLs at once. You get the screenshots, so that's good for batch testing. The other thing to keep in mind, obviously, is interstitials. Oftentimes on mobile, we have kind of weird or not so nicely used overlays, pop-ups, any of those. That is something that you should revisit. Make sure that on the mobile sites that's not present. Google has been very specific about that. This is something that can really definitely be problematic. So revisit that, make sure that this is not something that is going to hurt your site when the time has come. Search Console obviously has loads of different reports. I mean, they have this mobile usability report, which you should have a close eye on. But also, it's not only that one. It's obviously also the fetch and render, and not only on desktop rendering, but also on the mobile rendering. I mentioned it earlier, but funnily enough, people just overlook that there's two different ones. So just make sure that you test the mobile version, so the smartphone as well. Then the next step, once you have done the tiny ones in bits and pieces, page by page, I would definitely scale things up. So in DeepCrawl, you have the full section of mobile reports, configuration mismatches, relations that are missing, all of that stuff. So do a thorough and full audit, run a full crawl, and then make sure that you pay special attention to the mobile section and see that you have those fixed. Because I think at a scale that's definitely a problem if you have loads of say broken links on the mobile side. I think that can't be any good quality sign. You can then also obviously simulate that at scale. So if you'd be using Screaming Frog or any of the other where you can do rendering at scale, and again I mentioned that, so I just flipped through that. Make sure that really all the stuff that's just only available in markup and that you won't see straight away, indexation rules, canonicals, schema org, etc., is not only on the desktop but also on the mobile side. And then the most important thing, I guess, is really make sure to not panic. It's still Google, so I guess some things will break and others won't, and we just have to sort things out. And with that, I guess I'm through, and we can hopefully open it up for some of the questions.
Fantastic, and thank you, Bastian. Great talk, great info, and as always, and content, which is always great to see. And obviously, thanks for the mention, which is great. And we opened up questions. I've already got a load of questions, which is also great to see. So I'm gonna plow into them. We've got about 20 minutes left for Q&A. And obviously we can surmise and chat about it together. And but I want to kind of kick off with the first question, which I have from Charlie, which is seeing as site load speeds are important for mobile, would you say the use of PWA and AMP is even more important now than obviously in the old world?
Yeah, I think the problem with AMP and also PWA is that it's kind of, Google is really making huge effort to place AMP as a solution that essentially is, the one and only to make a site fast. And I think this is just not the case. So I think first and foremost, my answer would be make your website fast, and then think about, what can I do on top? Because essentially, if you're not a publisher, right, there is right now not necessarily a need to even care about AMP. You could do it. You don't gain much of it right now. In publishing, yes, of course, because you need to be in the carousel, and that's the only way to get in there is with AMP, right? So AMP in that case is needed. For everyone else, that could be a bonus, but not necessarily one that is really required. The other thing with AMP is, I mean, the only reason why AMP is actually fast is because they prefetch and pre-render the AMP URL from Google SERP, right? But if they would not give that bonus, then any other regular properly optimized site can be as fast as an AMP. And I showed a case back in SMX in Munich, and I'm going to be having something similar for search leads, where I think that just AMP shouldn't be the only solution. Just make your site fast, and then think about this kind of Google dependent framework and consider if that's really worth all your efforts, or if it's not invested better on something else.
No, definitely. I think we mentioned the word AMP, and it sparked an absolute question barrage, which is fantastic. So it's like AMP is hot on the tongue of most people. Which, and I think you're right in what you're saying, mate. I mean, I just had a question just as you were saying that last bit coming from Anthony Adams. Who said, how does AMP compare with properly rendered mobile sites? for this new index? Should we, and obviously you answered that a little bit there, and you said obviously good optimization of mobile pages is just as good as AMP. But his question as well went on to ask, should we just push our mobile traffic to AMP pages or keep both?
Well, I mean, the problem with AMP is still that functionality is limited. So there's still lots of things that you can't do on AMP that you can do on a regular site. Tracking is still, still a problem, to be very honest. You have quite a bit of limitations with, CSS. You can't use any JavaScript that's coming from third parties. So I would first and foremost be making sure that you can really do what you foresee to do in AMP before I would be even asking that question. And then oftentimes the answer is right now it doesn't work. I mean, the AMP team for the last 6 to 12 months is pushing like crazy on getting custom components live. So there's more functionality coming up, and then I know Airbnb, which is a client of ours, they do loads of stuff because they moved to AMP, crazily enough, and they're a heavy contributor. And I've also seen BMW being like full AMP now, so they're not even serving a regular site. So their entire markup is AMP markup, if you so will. And what it does, I think, to be fair, what it does is it sets a framework. So you can only do so much if the framework doesn't allow you to just only do some things and others don't. So in that case, it probably gives it gives teams the necessity to kind of work with performance benchmarks in mind, right? So that's great, but then again, you're stuck to one framework, which essentially is, I mean, yes, it's open source, but it's Google controlled. So I would not be willing to commit my site to that framework, but that's probably also a political discussion to have at some point.
No, I mean, it's a really good point, for sure. I mean, there's looking at there's just an absolute incredible amount of site questions coming around AMP at the moment, which is fantastic. It's obviously a hot topic. So I mean, there's another one from Hassan, which is we are using AMP for news detail websites, just as obviously as you mentioned there. And what his question is it necessary to create AMP sites for the main site and category section as well?
No, it's not. You can do it on a URL by URL basis, and I think that would also be the recommendation is if someone is really keen on testing it out, don't go crazy and scale it through the entire site, but rather figure out a type of site or a type of template, and start kind of building those out as AMP and see if that works for you. In terms of click-through rate, in terms of is monetization, because obviously, say you're ad dependent, then obviously ad tags are limited. So from the numbers that I know, monetization is still way worse compared to the regular mobile side. So these are all things that I would test out with a limited set, and you can do it URL by URL. That's fine.
No, definitely. So I absolutely agree, and I think it's we could probably talk about AMP for the rest of this the next 15 minutes in some respects. But let's talk about a couple of other things. I mean, you talked about tab content as well, kind of thing, and Lloyd Cook is asking, how easily do you think Google is going to switch from discounting tab content on desktop and not discounting it on mobile through obviously the mobile first indexing piece? Will long tail search be impacted perhaps?
Yeah, that's actually a good one. I was wondering that myself, because I mean, so I was always quite strongly believing, based on sites and testing and things that I've seen, that on desktop, when you just, even if the stuff is in the markup, but it's kind of in this display none area, that essentially you can't rank it properly. I mean, I know there are exceptions. Yes, I do understand that as always, but I would say the majority of sites that had hidden content on desktop, that didn't rank really well, the content in that hidden section. But on mobile, they just can't do it. So if you think about that, because you have those swiping, you have those read more elements all over, you have those expand things in lists, etc. I'm really curious, also from a say spamming perspective, how that plays out, because if they really reintroduce that, I mean, I recall what we did 5 to 10 years ago with hidden
Absolutely.
content. So I'm really curious how that plays out. The only answer that I have right now is I would just not, I would just, you know, if you have it on mobile, I would just keep it and see how it performs. And I think we all have to kind of collect more data over the next month and see if, you know, the statement, because essentially it's just a statement from Google saying it, you know, don't panic, it should work, no need to change it. Well, we have to see, don't we?
No, and it's a really good point. I absolutely agree. I mean, it's probably 5, 10 years. It's probably 10 years ago where everything was getting stuffed into certain scenarios. But I mean, Jennifer Wong actually asked exactly the same sort of question. You know, the fact that Google has confirmed that hidden or tabbed content on mobile will be normal content in some respects, and you know that knock-on effect is, you know, we've preached for the God knows how many years about hiding content within tabs on desktop. You know, is there going to be that shift onto desktop to treat it as normal, you know, normal content again as such, which I'm guessing for SEOs is just like lighting the fire and just letting it go loose again kind of thing in some respects.
It sounds to me like it is, yeah. Especially if they apply the logic the other way around now, say like, you know, you have the mobile site, and then obviously that content is kind of hidden, and they use the mobile site as the basis for the rankings, then obviously you should be able to hide it on the desktop as well. So yeah. I agree on that. I mean, the only but is probably, and that has been mentioned a couple of times, I just want to stress it because it's important. There's obviously technically different ways on how you can do this tabbed or any type of hidden content. What needs to be done is that it has to be in the markup. So it can't be anything that does, you know, do any type of asynchronous request, say Ajax fragment that pulls something from somewhere on any type of interaction. So really, if you have that, make sure that it's still in the markup and that it's just only kind of, you know, CSS styled in a way that it's not visible straight away. I think that's important.
No, I totally agree. And thinking about that, just, you know, the slowness and speed of stuff. Ricardo Diaz said, you know, will CMSs like WordPress become hindered because of all of their plugins? Effectively, you know, in the sense that load might potentially slow down your website. You know, they report that 30% of the web is using it, and you know, will, you know, multiple plugins within those sort of scenarios be affected by obviously Google's new speed metrics that they're bringing out, rather than using the old desktop speed metrics and obviously launching the new mobile speed metrics?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with this entire discussion around speed, and I mean, I've been talking about that for quite a while now, is that the desktop scores and the best practices on desktop, right? They are probably 5 to 7 years old and haven't changed that much. I mean, caching has always been a thing, right? You know, all of those things, they're just not really entirely new. But on mobile, it's just you still have to deal with this with the limited amount of bandwidth. Obviously 3G is still not a fiber connection, right? And then the fact that the data packages are still limited to it. Like if you want to have a paint on the mobile phone straight away, it's like 14 kilobytes. So that's not much considering what some of the sites waste and stuck into their head, right? So I think generally all the systems, no matter if it's WordPress or something else, and they are not really good with performance out of the box. So I'm not sure what the answer is there, but I think performance needs to be part of a company's DNA in any way, no matter if it's mobile first or if it's a desktop only site. And I think it should be part of, you know, all the teams' benchmark, you know, the user experience team, as well as marketing and others, to ensure that this is actually being taken care of. I think that's the only way to do it. And then it doesn't really matter what the system is, because if you have a business case and like a business setup that works, then, you know, it doesn't matter if it's WordPress or not.
Yeah, no, definitely, absolutely agree, mate. And thinking about obviously, Ricky Khan asked an interesting one around obviously, you know, with this change in SERP, by what percentage the mobile first ranking will play a part in the ranking score compared to desktop. I mean, obviously we're talking, and in some respects saying that it's going to be very much a mobile-led index. So that would suggest going very much down a mobile optimization route. And Wiki's kind of saying his current website desktop score is good at 82, and the mobile score's at 62. Is there a need to drastically shift that wheel, or is Google going to take desktop scoring into context alongside the mobile, or is it very much a mobile play as you see it?
Well, I'd say it's at some point it will be a mobile pure play, I guess, and it's just a matter of how long does it take them to get there? Because I mean, I recall quotes, I don't know who of the Googlers that was, but what they said, like, it might take years for them to fully have that index migrated over to being, say, mobile first for all the listings and results that they have in there. 100%. So I think, so we will be seeing something like, and I'm really curious how they do that. But if you think about it, say like 20% of the sites are switched over. That means for one SERP, there could be 1 or 2 being scored on the mobile first kind of logic, and then the other 8 are not. And then if you think about it, what they all have been saying is like, we're benchmarking performance just in relation to the top 10, but then some are based on desktop scores and some are based on mobile scores. To be very honest, I don't have an answer. I have no clue how they're going to do that. That's why I was always really surprised, and then also at some point a bit confused about this discussion about, we're switching partially, and then first we don't even tell you. So for me, it really felt a bit weird, to be very honest. And I don't have an answer, but I think I would make sure, especially at the point when you have this notification in Search Console, I would just make sure that you're kind of top in class for your mobile experience, and that also is true for the mobile performance scoring, I guess.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think it was John Mueller came out last year. It might have even been as far back as SMX Munich last year. And literally said, look, we are going to start to migrate any sites that we feel are mobile ready. We're going to, migrate them to the mobile index. Because they just can't flick a switch. They can't overnight just suddenly go, let's flick a switch and just move on, kind of thing, because all heck will break loose on the organic ranking. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think you're thinking about it in absolutely the right way. Quick question. It's a 5-second answer. Path Interactive. What keyword tool did you use to get your device breakdowns?
That was taken from Search Metrics, if I'm not totally mistaken. Yeah.
Cool. That was an easy one. So when you think about, we talked about responsive sites, and obviously Google came out and, John Mueller preached last year, go responsive. I've challenged that in some of my talks when I've talked about the mobile index and said, is that necessarily the way, or is that just Google being lazy? It's some, just everybody just go down this route kind of thing. Carlos Chacon said, obviously in the context of responsive versions, would you recommend native mobile sites plus desktop, or instead just go completely responsive?
I think to what you said and Google being lazy, I think why they're recommending responsive sites is simply the fact that you have everything in the markup, no matter what viewport you're using. I think that's really the biggest issue for them. Like on the M.dot, there's for loads of them, there's stuff missing. There's no canonical tags, there's no indexation rules, there's literally nothing. And I think if you have a responsive site and you get this viewport thing sorted, then you're good. I think that's why they mainly, so essentially you're right, they are partially lazy, I guess, and partially it's just that they want to ensure that they're not missing on stuff. I think that's what happened there. Back to the question, I think it's extremely, like, what I really liked about just the old-fashioned M.dot is the fact that you could do mobile specific optimizations. You would have way smaller, highly aggressively optimized images. You would have a cut down JavaScript. You would have a very tidy and compact CSS and all of that. That is way easier to optimize, also from a performance perspective. But then again, I know that most of the companies don't, because it's 2 different code bases to maintain, etc., etc. So essentially, responsive fixes that. The downside with responsive, though, is just, and I mentioned it earlier, is just the fact that the maintenance is less, but the effort to get it right first is way bigger. But my answer would be, if you have a chance to go proper, full, responsive, I would do it all over. It's a pain once, but once you have it right, it definitely pays off.
No, I think I'd 100% back you on that one. because I mean, I absolutely agree. As an SEO, I would challenge that world of just go responsive, but it seems like the quick fix. And interesting, ties into a couple of questions. Alexis Andros and Anastasia has talked about, asked about image quality. If we need to go mobile and they need to reduce the size, well, this desktop need a higher image resolution. Would .svg be an answer, or would you just kind of say optimize in the middle?
No, actually, that could be an answer. I think images, to get images right, that's really, really, really hard. This is because of so many different things. I mean, the resolution, the formats that we have, like the PNGs, JPEGs, and even the GIFs of this world, the formats are old and the formats are inefficient. That's the big problem that we're now facing. And if you look at the new formats, there's WebP, there's JPEG XR, and some others. They haven't picked up and they're not adapted yet. To cut a very long story short, if you're really into that, there's a deck on my SlideShare where I've talked about that. I think it was in Brighton. There's different services that you can also use. Cloudinary is one of the ones that I really like, because what they do is, and they're very, very cheap. What they do is you can put in one original image, and then they serve it in a proper resolution that you need, with the quality that you need. They're using the new formats like WebP if the device does allow it. All of that is really, really cool and can save 80 to 90% of the image traffic. We've seen some amazing results with that. And there's others that do it as well. So just feel free to poke through my deck on SlideShare, actually.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, we've got an endless amount of questions coming in here. I think we're probably going to have to answer some of these after the webinar and get back to some of the attendees. But for my couple of final few ones, which are always things I like to consider as well. Alessandra Piccolo has asked from a point of view of canonicals from MDOT to desktop. Obviously, we know how we go through the process, and the last few years of how we're canonicalizing from obviously through the MDOT back into the desktop. Is there going to be a need to revert that in the new world?
Very, very simply, no. And Google that was one of the questions that I had at the very beginning, actually. That's actually a good question, but they answered that and they said, don't change that. So the rel canonical, rel alternate annotations stay the same. Don't touch them.
Yeah, and leading on from that, just one from me adding to that in some respects, which is the world that we all love, which is hreflang. I mean, obviously there wasn't really an answer to that until sort of Gary Eilish came out at sort of PubCon last year and said, keep it version local. Yeah. Just want your take on that, mate, just to get your view, obviously, on the hreflang, just to cover off canonicalization, cover off hreflang. So everybody that's still on this webinar probably has a good answer to those things.
Yeah, I'm afraid the hreflang is probably one webinar for itself, to be very honest. It is in my opinion, and I think some others agree, it is the single hardest tag to get right, especially if you're on mobile versus desktop. And then you have multinational domains. There's just so many things to consider. It's a nightmare, and I think that's also the reason why the likes of John Mueller and others are talking about hreflang at literally every conference, because no one gets it right. It's just a monster of a beast. So there's no short answer to it. I think the only thing,
maybe another webinar for us then. I would say.
Probably. Make sure you have parity. So it also needs to be on the MDOT again, and then it needs to be synchronized. So that's the one thing that you should definitely do.
Yeah. One final one. David Levy's just, what was the name of the image service that you mentioned again?
Cloudinary. Sorry, bad pronunciation. German.
No, that's fine. Cloudinary was that one. I don't want people going away without the right image service. So I mean, all I can say is obviously a massive thank you to yourself, Bastian, from obviously PK's, CEO and founder of an amazing agency over there in Germany that just keeps going from strength to strength. We are effectively out of time. We've had our hour. And massive thank you to all of our attendees as well for coming on board and listening to the content we have today. We will make this recording available to you guys very, very quickly for anybody that did sign up to the webinar. And obviously, with Bastian's permission, we'll make the deck available as well. Yep. If you watch out from tomorrow morning, there will be a full write-up of all of everything that myself and Bastian have discussed on the DeepCrawl blog as of tomorrow. We'll look to speed that up and get that through very, very quickly for you guys. And as I say, I've just been getting fired an absolute ton of questions. So we've got, I mean, I've probably asked not even a fifth of the questions that we've had, kind of thing. So I think there might be some follow-up work for myself and Bastian to do on just maybe answering some of these questions for the attendees. So I really do thank you for your questions, and I do apologise if we didn't get to your question. We've just run out of time, which is brilliant. As Bastian mentioned as well earlier on, our next webinar is on the 30th of May. So it's only a few weeks away with Bartosz, Mr. JavaScript, as I've started to call him, from the agency in Poland called Elevate, and he's been all over the world talking about JavaScript. So that, again, should be a fantastic session, and we'll be starting to promote that as of next Monday to allow you guys to get signed up. Also, for everybody that's still on the line, there's a survey at the end of this webinar. I would absolutely love to get your feedback. We really, really welcome it. We want to get better at these things. Today has been brilliant. It's had great attendance, and but we just want to get better. And we'd like to hear your thoughts on what we could do better, and maybe some of the topics we'd talk about. I think we found one, Bastian and hreflang, and I certainly think we should do. I think we should do that because it's the one that everybody wants to get their hands around. Again, massive thank you, Bastian, for your time today. My name is John Myers, Chief Growth Officer at DeepCrawl, and thank you to all of our attendees. And that is the end of our webinar today on mobile index and what to think about going forward in the new Google world. Thank you again.
Bye.